The hunt begins. Blackwood's qualifications. Blackwood sat stiff-backed in the uncomfortable chair, his posture as rigid as if he were commanding the quarterdeck. His hands rested neatly in his lap, fingers interlaced with the discipline of a man accustomed to control. Across from him, a man in a crisp navy suit adjusted his glasses and scanned the resume, an unimpressive, hastily assembled document Finn had cobbled together the night before. The office was a cold, sterile place, glass, steel, and a carpet so pristine it looked as though no one had dared to set foot on it. In the corner, a lone potted plant stood in a losing battle against neglect. Blackwood eyed it with mild disdain. Even plants were poorly disciplined in this world. "So, Mr. Blackwood, is it?" The interviewer tapped the paper. "Aye," Blackwood replied evenly. The man nodded, his gaze flicking over the resume. "Interesting background you have here. Leadership experience, extensive time at sea, logistics management." Blackwood inclined his head. "I captained a ship." The interviewer pursed his lips, intrigued. "And what exactly were your primary duties as captain?" Blackwood answered without hesitation. "Maintaining discipline, commanding the crew, strategizing raids, negotiating terms of surrender." The man's head snapped up. "I'm sorry, what was that last one?" Blackwood met his gaze without a flicker of emotion. "Terms of surrender." The interviewer blinked. "Ah." He cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Right." He set the resume down, steepling his fingers. "Well, you certainly seem to have leadership qualities. This position is for a managerial role at a shipping company. What would you say your greatest strength is?" Blackwood barely had to think. "Authority." The interviewer nodded slowly. "And your greatest weakness?" Blackwood considered the question. "Mercy." A weighted pause filled the room. The interviewer's forced smile barely concealed his nervous swallow. "I see." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "Well, we still have a few more candidates to see, but we'll be in touch." Blackwood stood smoothly, adjusting his coat. "Aye." With a final nod, he strode out of the office, his boots clicking against the polished floor like the measured steps of a man who had once decided fates at sea. The interviewer watched him leave, then exhaled sharply, sagging into his chair. After a moment's hesitation, he pressed the intercom button. Yeah, let's put a note here. Maybe not the best fit." Garrick gives it a shot. Garrick sat across from a tired-looking man in a wrinkled button-up, the name tag on his chest reading Ray Assistant Manager. The office smelled faintly of stale coffee and synthetic pine, a combination that did little to mask the underlying scent of exhaustion. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered now and then, buzzing like a swarm of lazy insects. A stack of applications sat on Ray's desk, untouched. Instead, he was squinting at Garrick, like he wasn't entirely convinced he was real. "So, says here you've got experience with fortifications and defensive strategy." Ray scratched his stubbly chin. "You're applying for a security job?" Garrick nodded once. "Aye." Ray leaned back in his chair, clearly skeptical. "You ever worked security before?" Garrick smirked. "I've defended me ship from invaders, held the line against boarding parties, and sent many a scoundrel running with their tails tucked." He cracked his knuckles for emphasis. Ray raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. And have you ever used a security system? Cameras, alarms, keycards, stuff like that?" Garrick frowned. "A system? We had a powder room with 3 locks and a man posted at the door. If he fell asleep, he got tossed overboard. That's a system." Ray blinked slowly. "Right. Not exactly what I meant." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Okay, let's try a scenario. You're working the night shift at a store. It's 2 a.m., real quiet. Then, bam, some guy in a ski mask busts in, tries to rob the place. What do you do?" Garrick grinned, leaning forward. "Ah, that's easy. First, I strike him hard and fast, break his will before he can act. If he keeps fighting, I subdue him, tie him up, and leave him in the storeroom till dawn. Then I inform the authorities, though if it were my ship, I'd—" Ray held up a hand. Yeah, I get it. But, you can't really assault people here. Garrick frowned. Even if they be deserving it. Ray exhaled sharply. Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but we're looking for someone who follows procedure. You know, calls the cops first. Doesn't, he gestured vaguely, tie people up. Garrick scoffed. Aye, call in the watchman first. What a grand strategy. Give the scoundrel a head start. Maybe offer him a biscuit while I'm at it. He crossed his arms. You might as well hang a sign inviting rogues to rob you blind. Ray forced a chuckle. Yeah, so I think we're gonna pass. Garrick stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Bah! If you don't want a proper defender, then I shan't waste me time. Ray watched him stomp out, muttering, What a weirdo, before reaching for his coffee and taking a long, resigned sip. The wrong impression. Blackwood sat with the practiced stillness of a man accustomed to commanding a room without needing to fill it with words. Across from him, Marissa Caldwell, bank manager, studied his application with the sharp, discerning eye of someone used to spotting red flags. Her desk was pristine, everything arranged at precise right angles, not a single pen out of place. A stark contrast to the chaos of the job listings office where Finn had hastily sent him. She adjusted her glasses, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the paper. So, Mr. Blackwood, she began, her tone polite but distant, you're interested in a position as a financial consultant? Aye. Blackwood's voice was smooth, composed. I've spent many years handling the division of wealth, managing shares, and ensuring fair distribution among stakeholders. Marissa arched a brow. Stakeholders? Blackwood inclined his head slightly. Aye. A proper leader must keep a keen eye on coin, lest disputes arise. She flipped the page, her gaze narrowing. It says here, you have experience with negotiations. Aye, Blackwood confirmed. When conflicts arose, it was my duty to ensure all parties reached a satisfactory agreement. Marissa leaned forward slightly. And what if they didn't? Blackwood offered the faintest of smiles. They did. A pause. The air between them shifted. Marissa's fingers tightened slightly around her pen. And what methods did you use to ensure that? Blackwood tilted his head, as considering whether she truly wanted to know. A firm tone, persuasion, occasionally an adjustment of expectations. Adjustment? Aye, a man's priorities can change dramatically when presented with proper motivation. Her pen stopped tapping. She studied him carefully, her professional mask slipping just a fraction. You're talking about extortion, aren't you? Blackwood met her gaze, unreadable. Is that not a form of negotiation? Marissa exhaled slowly, setting the application aside. Look, Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate confidence, but we're looking for someone with experience in modern finance, stocks, investments, market analysis. Blackwood's expression remained steady. Money is money, Miss Caldwell. Whether counted in coin or paper, the rules do not change. Marissa forced a smile, the kind used in customer service when trying to end a conversation without inviting further argument. That's an interesting perspective, but I don't think you'd be a good fit for this role. Blackwood inclined his head in a gesture of respect. A pity. I should think me skills quite useful in matters of finance. Marissa sighed, tapping her pen against the desk, as if contemplating a choice she wouldn't dare make. I have no doubt, but our firm operates within strict legal boundaries. Blackwood rose smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of his coat with measured precision. Ah, I understand. He bowed slightly. Then I thank you for your time. Marissa watched him exit, exhaling only once the door shut behind him. She shook her head, reaching for her coffee. That guy definitely ran a criminal empire. Blackwood finds his calling. Finally. Blackwood stood before an old wooden desk, taking in his surroundings with quiet appreciation. The room was a relic of the past, filled with maritime artifacts, weathered maps curling at the edges, cutlasses mounted on the walls, and glass cases displaying model ships in meticulous detail. The air carried the scent of aged parchment, polished wood, and the faintest trace of salt, as if the very ghosts of the sea lingered here. A massive painting dominated the far wall, depicting a chaotic sea battle, cannons blazing, sails torn, and men locked in desperate combat beneath a storm-lit sky. It was a scene Blackwood knew all too well. Behind the desk sat an older gentleman with a neatly groomed moustache that curled slightly at the ends, his sharp, inquisitive gaze studying Blackwood with the kind of scrutiny that suggested he had seen his fair share of frauds. His suit, though refined, showed signs of wear, the mark of a man more interested in history than appearances. A polished brass nameplate on his desk read, "Arthur Pemberley Museum Curator." Pemberley folded his hands, eyes twinkling with amusement. "Well, well, you certainly look the part." Blackwood inclined his head. "Aye, that be the general consensus." Pemberley chuckled. "Good to see a fellow who takes historical authenticity seriously. You'd be surprised how many applicants think slapping on an eye patch and shouting R is enough to make them an expert." He leaned forward, his gaze scrutinizing. "But you carry yourself like a man who's lived it." Blackwood allowed himself a small smirk. "Ye might say I have." Pemberley's grin widened. "That's the kind of commitment I like to see. Now, this position requires more than just looking the part. A guide must bring history to life, immerse guests in the world of piracy. Tell me, Mr. Blackwood, how would you engage a tour group?" Blackwood cast an assessing glance around the room before stepping toward a display. He gestured to a cutlass mounted on the wall. This blade, well-balanced, slightly curved, a fine weapon in a broadside skirmish, but not worth a damn in a boarding fight. Too long, too unwieldy. He shifted his attention to a shorter dagger displayed beside it. Now, this dirk, quick, deadly, a proper tool for up-close work when a man finds himself in tight quarters with an enemy who's misjudged the tides. Pemberley let out a delighted laugh. "By God, that's exactly what I want to hear." He leaned back, grinning. "Tell me, Blackwood, what do you think of how pirates are portrayed in modern media?" Blackwood exhaled sharply. "A crime, sir. A true crime. They turn men of fortune into bumbling fools, slander their code, and paint them as mere ruffians. But piracy had order, a system. No ship sailed long under a fool, and no captain held command without the respect of his crew. A pirate ship was more democratic than any kingdom of its time." Pemberley slapped his desk with enthusiasm. "Precisely. People forget that they weren't just cutthroats. They were rebels, outlaws against oppression, pioneers of a lawless democracy." He grinned. "Tell me, do you know the pirate's code?" Blackwood raised a brow. "The real one, or the romantic nonsense spun by playwrights?" Pemberley laughed again, eyes gleaming. "I think you're exactly what we need here." He pulled a contract from his desk and slid it forward. "The job's yours if you want it." Blackwood glanced at the paper, then back at Pemberley. "You mean to pay me to speak the truth of the sea and its ways?" "With full benefits," Pemberley added, "and access to the museum archives. I suspect a man like you would appreciate those." A slow grin crept across Blackwood's face. "Aye, Mr. Pemberley. I accept your terms." Red's new post. Red sat across from a thick-necked man in a navy blue uniform, the words "Head of Security" embroidered above his breast pocket. The air in the office was heavy with the mingling scents of stale coffee and cheap cologne, and the walls were lined with flickering monitors displaying various angles of the mall. Clothing stores, food courts, and long, sterile hallways where the occasional shopper wandered aimlessly. Frank DeLuca, the man behind the desk, studied Red with an expression that hovered between intrigue and cautious skepticism. He drummed his fingers against a well-worn file folder before leaning back in his chair. "So," DeLuca mused, tapping the folder. "Says here you don't have any prior experience in security." Red tilted his head slightly. "Would you count guarding a ship against mutiny, smugglers, and the occasional Royal Navy patrol?" DeLuca let out a short, surprised laugh. "Ha! That's a new one." He scratched his jaw, grinning. You got a real sense of humor. I like that. So, tell me, why do you want to work mall security? Red considered the question seriously. Well, I do be finding myself in a strange land, and I reckon a man ought to keep a purpose, keep order, watch for scoundrels. Not unlike standing watch aboard ship. DeLuca smirked, clearly entertained. Yeah? And what do you think makes a good security officer? Red's fingers drummed idly against the wooden armrest of the chair. A keen eye for trouble, a steady hand when it arrives, and knowing when a man's a fool and when he's a threat. DeLuca nodded, impressed despite himself. That's actually a solid answer. He flipped through the application again, brow furrowing slightly. Now it says here you're, well-versed in handling hostile individuals and preventing plundering of goods. Aye. DeLuca grinned. So you mean like shoplifters? If that be your word for those who pilfer without claim, then aye. DeLuca snorted. And how would you handle a shoplifter? Red cracked his knuckles. Depends. A hungry lad sneaking a morsel from the baker's table. You warn him? A man stuffing his coat with trinkets to sell? You make a fine example of him. DeLuca chuckled, shaking his head. Man, you really stay in character, huh? He leaned forward, sizing Red up once more. You know what? I like you. You've got presence, confidence, and honestly, you look like the kind of guy who makes people think twice before causing trouble. Aye, Red said simply. DeLuca grabbed a paper from his desk, scribbled something on it, and slid it across. All right, I'm hiring you. Just got to pass a background check, but I got a feeling you're clean. Red hesitated before taking the paper. Aye, 'tis unlikely you'll find much on me. DeLuca winked. That's what I like to hear. He stood, extending his hand. Welcome to the team, Red. Red stood as well, clasping DeLuca's forearm with a firm grip. You won't regret this, Frank DeLuca. DeLuca laughed. Man, you really commit to the bit, huh? Red gave a slight grin, tucked the hiring paper under his belt, and left the office, having absolutely no idea what a background check was. Sullivan's gig. Sullivan's choice. Sullivan adjusted his coat, taking in the establishment before him. The siren's call was a far cry from the rowdy, lantern-lit taverns he was accustomed to. The deep bass of unseen speakers pulsed through the dimly lit space, mixing with the faint scent of liquor and citrus. The long, polished bar stretched across the back wall, lined with bottles in every shade of amber, gold, and ruby, each label gleaming under the cool neon glow. Unlike the chaotic dens of drunken sailors he had known, this place had an air of controlled indulgence, refined, yet still brimming with mischief. Behind the bar stood Rico Alvarez, the club's manager. He was tall and sharp-featured, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his dark eyes scanning Sullivan with an expression that blended amusement and scrutiny. The rolled sleeves of his black button-up revealed tattooed forearms, inked stories of a man who had lived through more than a few long nights. So, Rico began, tapping cocktail shaker against the counter. Sullivan, right? Aye, Sullivan nodded, standing with the practiced ease of a man being sized up. Rico gestured to the bar. Ever worked as a bartender before? Sullivan tilted his head. If pouring ale into a man's tankard and breaking a bottle over his head when he don't pay counts, then aye. Rico huffed a short laugh, shaking his head. All right, I like the attitude. But this ain't some back-alley dive. You're not just pouring drinks here, you're entertaining. People come to a place like this for the experience, not just the liquor. He leaned forward, forearms resting on the bar. You think you can handle that? Sullivan glanced around the club. Entertaining drunks? Hell, that was half of what kept a ship from turning into a mutiny. I reckon I can keep 'em entertained, he said, meeting Rico's gaze evenly. Rico smirked. All right, let's see what you know. He turned, plucked a bottle of rum from the shelf, and set it down with a quiet clink. Then he placed an empty glass in front of Sullivan. Make me an old-fashioned. Sullivan stared at him. A what? Rico arched an eyebrow. You know, bourbon, bitters, sugar, orange peel. Sullivan exhaled slowly. Ah, aye, a rum blend. Rico let out a chuckle. Not exactly, but sure. Let's start with something simple then. He grabbed a second bottle. How about a rum and coke? Sullivan narrowed his eyes at the dark liquid inside the unfamiliar glass container. A what? Rico blinked. Oh boy. Sullivan folded his arms. You want rum? I can pour it. You want it cut with something? I can throw in water. Beyond that, I suspect your patrons are more delicate than the crew I once served. Rico studied him for a long beat, then let out a short laugh. You're serious? Aye. Rico shook his head, still amused. All right, listen, man. We can train you. You've clearly worked around booze, and you got the look. Guys like you bring in customers. People eat this whole pirate thing up. Just don't go breaking bottles over heads, all right? Sullivan exhaled through his nose. I'll restrain myself. Rico gave him another once-over before nodding. You're hired. Trial run starts Friday night. We'll see if you sink or swim. Sullivan picked up the bottle of rum Rico had set down, weighing it in his hand. The work was familiar, but something about it sat wrong with him. He had poured many a drink in his day, aye, but never to serve men who looked through him as if he were part of the furniture. The notion of standing behind a counter, trapped while others reveled, didn't sit well in his gut. Still, for now it would do. He set the bottle down, met Rico's gaze, and gave a single nod. Aye, I'll be here. Garrick the Natural. Garrick stormed down the bustling streets of Miami, his boots striking the pavement with enough force to make pedestrians glance his way. The sun glared down, unrelenting, and the city around him pulsed with unnatural energy. Cars zipped past, blaring horns in chaotic bursts. People weaved through the sidewalks with purpose he couldn't fathom, and the air carried an odd mixture of salt, exhaust, and a cursedly sweet scent that made his stomach turn. How in the devil's name did I fail that interview? He grumbled, adjusting his coat. His first attempt at finding work had ended in what he could only describe as absolute nonsense. The questions had been strange. The man behind the desk had looked at him like he had a second head, and apparently answering, "What are your strengths?" with, "I'm good with a blade, and I can hold my liquor better than any man alive," was not the correct response. He scoffed. Ridiculous. What sort of land was this, where practical skills were met with such disdain? Lost in thought, he nearly walked straight into a towering metal gate. He stopped short, glancing up to find a large sign hanging above it. Cast Crew Entrance Blood Glory Film Production. Beyond the open gate, the space teemed with activity. Crates were being hauled. Men and women in headsets barked orders, and half-dressed actors milled about in elaborate period costumes. A massive wooden galleon backdrop loomed in the distance, its sails billowing under the force of unseen fans. Garrick's lips curled into a grin. Now this looked promising. Before he could make sense of what he was walking into, a woman with a headset and a clipboard stormed toward him. Finally! You're late! Garrick blinked. No excuses. They're already set up inside. Wardrobe's gonna have to deal with you, as is. She waved a hand, already turning back toward the lot. Move it! For a brief moment, he considered questioning what exactly he was being dragged into. But then again, what was the harm? If the city insisted on throwing obstacles in his path, he would simply seize whatever opportunities presented themselves. He strode after her with practiced confidence, navigating the maze of set pieces as she continued shouting orders at passing crew members. If this was a test, he would pass it on his own terms. Inside a dimly lit warehouse-turned soundstage, a stormy sea backdrop stretched across the far wall, framing a mock ship's deck. Camera rigs loomed overhead, and a cluster of men in chairs observed the setup with calculating expressions. One man in particular caught Garrick's attention. A balding figure with a bushy grey beard, round spectacles perched on the edge of his nose. His sharp gaze locked onto Garrick immediately, eyes narrowing with interest. The woman gestured toward him. This is him. The bearded man, the director presumably, tilted his head. You're him? Garrick placed a hand on his hip. That depends. Who am I supposed to be? The director grinned. He turned to his assistants. You see? He's already got it. That presence, that gravitas. He gestured toward the mock ship's deck. All right, let's see what you've got. This scene. You're a pirate lord, ruthless, commanding. You're about to execute a mutineer. He's begging for mercy. Garrick's grin widened. Ah, now this was something he could work with. A young actor, clearly nervous, knelt before him. But please, Captain, I was only following orders. Garrick tilted his head, feigning contemplation, before straightening to his full height. When he spoke, his voice boomed across the soundstage, rich with disdain. Orders? A man who follows orders without question is naught but a dog. Nay, less than a dog, for even a cur knows when to bite back. He took a measured step forward, his boots making the wooden planks groan beneath their weight. You turned on your own crew, and now you expect mercy? He let the question hang in the thick silence. Then he smirked coldly. What a fool! The room had gone still. The air, once filled with shuffling and murmured conversations, now held nothing but the weight of his words. Even the director, who had been shifting excitedly in his chair, sat motionless, as if unwilling to break the moment. Then, as if a spell had snapped, the man shot to his feet. That was incredible. He turned to his assistants. Get this man a contract. Now. Garrick arched a brow. Just like that? Just like that, the director confirmed, still grinning. I don't know where you came from, but you were born for this. Garrick folded his arms, satisfaction settling deep in his chest. This was not the kind of command he was accustomed to, no. But if this world refused to bow to his expectations, then fine. He would conquer it by their own rules. Through sheer force of will. And, apparently, dramatic monologues. Just then, a disgruntled actor wandered on set, dressed in full makeup and pirate garb, and yelled, 5 hours of makeup and hair for nothing? He was promptly ushered away, at behest of the director. Recounts and revelry. Finn's apartment had never been pristine, but after a week of pirates taking up residence, it had gone from lived in to looted. Empty takeout boxes were stacked on the counter in precarious towers, mismatched clothes draped over furniture like abandoned sails, and near the door sat a pile of boots, haphazard, as if their owners had fled some unseen battle. In the center of the chaos, Finn stood frozen, his expression caught between horror and sheer exhaustion. Across from him, Red planted 1 foot atop the smoldering remains of his Roomba, hands on his hips like a victorious warlord. It tried to escape, Red declared, sheathing his cutlass with a flourish. Finn ran a hand down his face. It wasn't escaping, it was cleaning. Aye, cleaning house all right, making off with all the dust like a proper thief, Red countered. I caught it sneaking under the couch, lurking in the shadows like a scurvy rat. He nudged the destroyed machine with the tip of his boot. It won't be causing any more trouble. Finn inhaled slowly, massaging his temples. That thing cost me $300, Red. Red shrugged. Consider it a fair trade for the monstrosity's defeat. Finn opened his mouth, whether to argue or to collapse into despair. Even he wasn't sure. But before he could begin, Blackwood cleared his throat. The pirate captain was seated comfortably in Finn's worn-out recliner, his imposing presence somewhat undercut by the fact that he was sipping a soda through a straw. If we're quite finished slaying household appliances, Blackwood drawled, I've news to share. The room settled. Garrick and Sullivan, who had been watching the exchange with varying degrees of amusement, leaned in slightly. Finn, still glaring at the remains of his Roomba, sighed. Well? Blackwood took a measured sip, then set his drink aside. I've secured employment. That earned a round of raised brows. Garrick smirked. What manner of fool was convinced to put you on a payroll? A man of great vision. Arthur Pemberley be his name. Blackwood replied smoothly. He runs a museum, one dedicated to history, to our era no less. Upon meeting me, he was taken with my, authenticity. In this new position, I am to educate visitors on the golden age of piracy. I walk the halls, tell the tales, even demonstrate proper swordplay when occasion calls for it. He leaned back, looking undeniably pleased. It is, in truth, not so different from commanding a crew, only with fewer floggings and far more children asking questions about the use of Yar. Sullivan chuckled. And your employer? What's he like? Blackwood steepled his fingers. A scholar, but not the sort who merely reads of the past. He respects it. Speaks of the sea as if he longs for it, though I suspect he's ne'er set foot on a deck that weren't bolted to land. He sees in me a way to bring history to life. His gaze darkened slightly, contemplative. He values the past. That alone makes him worth respect. Sullivan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. So what? You be a walking exhibit now? Blackwood tilted his head. If it means gold in my pocket and a roof o'er my head, I'll not complain. His lips curled into a wry smile. Besides, if the world demands we assimilate, I'd rather do so in a manner that does not insult my dignity. Finn clapped his hands together. Well, I'd like to know who else found themselves a job today. Who's up next? Sullivan groaned. Do we have to? Yes, Finn and Blackwood said in unison. Sullivan leaned back against the couch, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as the others turned their attention to him. His usual air of quiet disapproval was present, but beneath it lurked something else, an irritation that ran deeper than his usual distaste for their circumstances. Blackwood, still lounging in Finn's recliner, swirled his drink with idle amusement. Well? Sullivan exhaled sharply through his nose, rubbing his jaw. Got a job. Garrick leaned forward with a grin. What? Did some poor sod mistake you for a banker? Sullivan shot him a look that could curdle milk. Bartender. There was a beat of silence. Then Red let out a full-bodied laugh, slapping his thigh. You? Serving drinks? That's rich. Finn smirked. I mean, you do know your liquor. Aye, Sullivan said darkly, which is why it vexes me to be wasting it on the likes of drunkards who wouldn't know a fine spirit from bilge water. Blackwood raised a brow. And yet, here ye sit, employed. Sullivan's jaw tightened. The owner, Rico, needed someone who looked like they've thrown a man out before. Finn's smirk widened. Can't say he was wrong. Sullivan ignored that. It's a club, loud, modern. He said the word like it was something he had to scrape off the bottom of his boot. They've machines that do half the work. No need to measure nothing, just push a damn button. But Rico, he don't trust machines. Likes a personal touch. His mouth twisted slightly. Says I've got presence. His fingers drummed once against his arm. Says I add to the atmosphere. Red cackled. You mean to tell me some landlubber took one look at your miserable face and thought, aye, now there's a man who knows how to entertain? Sullivan's glare could have sunk a ship. Apparently, my disposition suits the clientele. Finn tilted his head. So, what exactly are your duties? Sullivan exhaled slowly, like he was bracing himself. Pour drinks, look menacing, keep fools from swinging at each other. He ran a hand through his hair, scowling. Rico don't like trouble in his establishment. He says, Sully, you don't need to talk, just stand there and be scary. Garrick snorted. Not much of a stretch. Sullivan continued as if he hadn't heard. He's got rules. No brawls, no spitting, no weapons. And if some lout gets the notion to make a fool of himself, it's my job to put him out on his arse. Blackwood considered this. Sounds much like running a deck. Sullivan grunted. Aye, if the deck were made of flashing lights and reeked of perfume and desperation. Finn chuckled. And Rico, what's he like? Sullivan hesitated. He's different. His fingers tapped absently against his arm. Not like most I've met in this time. He's sharp, sees more than he lets on. But he don't pry, just takes things as they come. His brow furrowed slightly. Said he trusts his gut about people. Says he likes my vibe. he scoffed. Not sure what that means, but he pays well enough. Blackwood nodded slowly. And you mean to stay? Sullivan rolled his shoulders. For now, it's work. He sighed, the tension in his jaw easing ever so slightly. And at least the rum's not completely terrible. Red slapped his knee. Ah, Sullivan's got himself a home. Sullivan shot him a look so sharp it could have cut rigging. Don't push your luck. Finn grinned, glancing around at the gathered crew. All right, who's next? Red lounged in Finn's second-hand armchair, like a man who had just claimed it as his personal throne. He stretched his legs out, ankles crossed, looking more at ease than any of them had since their arrival in this bewildering era. The others watched him now, waiting for his turn. He scratched at the side of his face, considering how best to begin. Well, he said finally, dragging out the word, I reckon I've been conscripted into something of a land patrol. Blackwood raised a brow. Explain. Red smirked, clearly enjoying the build-up. They call it security enforcement. Sullivan squinted. Security for what exactly? A large indoor market, Red said, choosing his words carefully. Bigger than any I've ever laid eyes on. I swear, the place is a kingdom unto itself. Finn stifled a laugh, but Red either didn't notice or didn't care. Garrick frowned. They needed guards for a market? Red shrugged. 'Tis a grand place, full of shops, food halls, and folk wandering about like lost lambs. Easy pickings for thieves and charlatans, I'd wager, which is where I come in. He grinned. Turns out they like a man with a keen eye for trouble. Blackwood nodded, satisfied. A respectable duty, then. Aye, Red agreed, clearly pleased with himself. And not a bad post, neither. The fella in charge, name's Frank DeLuca. He's a hard sort, but fair. Says he runs a tight ship and expects the same of his men. Red tapped his temple. Got a mind for strategy, too. Knows where a scoundrels like to be lurking before they even think to do it. Blackwood stroked his beard. And your duties? Walk the grounds, keep the peace, and make sure no one's causing undue ruckus. Red's expression turned slightly smug. There's rules, you see. Folk can't just take what they please, nor cause disorder, and if they do... He leaned forward, his grin widening. Well, let's just say I've been given permission to intervene. Sullivan's interest sharpened. You mean to tell me they let you chase down thieves? More than that, Red said proudly. They expect me to. Garrick snorted. And here I thought you'd never take orders again. Red shrugged, unbothered. A man's got to eat. Besides, DeLuca lets us handle things our way, long as the job gets done. He's got faith in his crew. Finn tilted his head. And what do you think of it? Red's smirk lingered, but there was something thoughtful beneath it now. It's different. The way they do things, the tools they use, it's all strange, but the bones of it, it ain't so unlike a ship's watch. He cracked his knuckles. And I'll tell you this, there's no shortage of excitement. Folk get desperate in a place like that. Makes for an interesting patrol. Blackwood gave a nod of approval. Sounds like you've landed in familiar waters then. Aye, Red said, eyes gleaming. And I've got no complaints. Finn clapped his hands together. All right then, who's left? All eyes turned to Garrick. Garrick leaned back against Finn's kitchen counter, arms crossed over his chest, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at his lips. The others sat in various states of curiosity, exhaustion, or mild amusement. Red still looked pleased with himself. Sullivan had an elbow propped on the table like he was already halfway to sleep, and Blackwood sat with his usual air of authority, waiting for the last report of the night. Well, Finn prompted, nudging Garrick with a foot from where he perched on the counter beside him. Are you going to tell them, or should I? Garrick snorted. I hardly see what's so complicated about it. I found work. Blackwood nodded. And? Garrick took a dramatic pause, letting the room hang in suspense just long enough to be irritating. Then he grinned. I am a pirate. There was a beat of silence before Sullivan, rubbing at his temple, muttered, "Didn't you used to be a pirate lord?" No, Garrick corrected, straightening. "I am a pirate. Only now I do it in front of an audience." He flashed his teeth. "For coin." Blackwood's brow furrowed. "Explain." Garrick pushed off the counter, sauntering into the center of the room like a man about to deliver a monologue. I found myself at the center of a grand stage, an entire production, complete with set pieces, sailors, and fools ready to throw themselves to the wolves for entertainment. He made a sweeping gesture. They needed a man to command their make-believe fleet, and lo, I arrived. Red squinted. "You joined a theater troupe?" Garrick's smirk faltered for half a second before he recovered. "Not a theater troupe. It's grander than that. They make moving pictures, whole stories, captured in some infernal magic box and displayed for the masses. They call it a film." He pronounced the word carefully, like it was something foreign on his tongue. Sullivan exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. "So you're an actor?" "I am a pirate lord," Garrick corrected with a flourish. "A feared and commanding presence upon the seas." He grinned. "And the director, Chapman his name is, recognized my natural talent at once." Blackwood, who had been sipping his drink, let out a quiet laugh. "Natural talent, eh?" Garrick ignored him. "The moment I set foot on their mock ship, they knew. I belong at the heart of their story." Red leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "And they pay well?" Garrick's grin widened. "Better than any of your miserable posts, I'd wager." Sullivan scoffed. "I'd like to see your face when they make you take orders." Garrick's confidence didn't falter. "I don't take orders. I give performances." Blackwood drummed his fingers against the table, still considering. "And this Chapman, he's a man of coin?" "A man of great coin," Garrick confirmed. "And he's willing to throw a significant portion of it my way to continue being myself." He looked positively smug. Red let out a low whistle. "You, getting paid to be a pirate. That's a stroke of luck I wouldn't have wagered on." Garrick smirked. "The world may change, but some things remain the same." Blackwood gave a slow nod, seeming to approve. "Then it seems we all have our posts." The realization settled over the room. It was an odd thing. None of them had sought out a new way of life, yet here they were, slipping into the strange order of this world, finding roles where they fit. Finn, still sipping his drink, finally broke the quiet. "So what I'm hearing is," he pointed at each of them in turn, "a museum pirate, a bar hand, a mall enforcer." Red tilted his head. "Security officer." Finn ignored him. "And a Hollywood star." Garrick smirked. "You forgot our guide and benefactor." Finn rolled his eyes. "Oh, how could I?" The group sat in an odd sort of silence, each absorbing the reality of their circumstances. It wasn't what any of them had planned. It certainly wasn't where they had thought they'd end up when they'd first opened their eyes on that beach. But here they were. And for now, it would do. 1 month later, Blackwood's grand tour. The museum air carried the faint scent of polished wood, aged paper, and the oddly sterile chill of air conditioning. Under the grand glow of exhibit lights, a ship's wheel, weathered, scarred, yet proud, stood mounted behind a glass case. It was an impressive centerpiece, but it was not the most commanding presence in the room. That honor belonged to the towering figure in front of it. Blackwood stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his coat pristine, his boots polished, his stance exuding the quiet authority of a man who had once ruled the seas. He surveyed his audience, a cluster of tourists, clad in pastel shorts, sneakers and shirts, emblazoned with everything from Florida Strong to a large cartoon mouse. The unmistakable signs of the Midwest radiated from their polite, yet mildly confused expressions. "Behold," Blackwood declared, his voice rich and rolling like the tide, "a relic of an age when men carved their names into history with steel and powder. This wheel, once grasped by hands calloused from salt and battle, steered a vessel through treacherous waters, defying both nature and enemy alike. A woman in a sunflower print dress adjusted her sun visor. "So it's like an old ship wheel?" Blackwood turned his gaze to her, nodding solemnly. "Aye, but not merely old, seasoned, tempered by storm and cannon fire. It was the heart of command, the keystone of survival upon the merciless seas." A man with a fanny pack hesitated, then raised his hand as if Blackwood were a schoolteacher. "So, you're like, really in character, huh?" Blackwood tilted his head slightly. "In character?" The museum tour coordinator, a nervous-looking young woman standing off to the side, cleared her throat. "Mr. Blackwood is one of our immersive guides," she explained quickly. "We like to bring history to life." Blackwood gave her a slight nod of approval before turning back to his audience. "Aye, and life it did have," he continued. "The Horizon's Wake, for that was her name, was no mere merchant barge. She was a vessel of war and legend. It was upon her deck that Captain Elias Hawthorne made his final stand against the Royal Navy, outnumbered, outgunned, yet unbroken." A boy with a slushie in hand squinted at the plaque next to the display. "Says here the ship sank 'cause it caught on fire." Blackwood's jaw tensed, though his expression remained composed. He stepped closer to the boy, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone. "That is what they say, lad. But history is a treacherous thing, shaped by the hands of those who write it. Who is to say the flames did not serve as a shroud for Hawthorne's escape? That he did not slip into the night, his legend living on in whispers and shadow?" The boy's eyes widened. "Whoa." The museum coordinator shifted uncomfortably. Let's stick to the official script, please." Blackwood turned toward her slowly, as if personally insulted. "Would you have me tell half a tale?" She forced a tight-lipped smile. "We just like to keep things accurate." Blackwood exhaled sharply through his nose, but conceded with a slight incline of his head. He turned back to the group. "Very well. Official records claim she burned, and Hawthorne with her. But let us not forget, history is written by those who stand to gain from its telling." A grizzled man in a Packers hat, who had spent most of the tour nodding in vague interest, suddenly raised a hand. "Hey, so, what's your real name?" Blackwood arched a brow. "I have been known by many names, but none so true as the one I bear." The man chuckled. Right. But like, when you're not working, what's on your driver's license?" Blackwood's expression did not falter. "What is a license if not a means to contain a man within the confines of ink and bureaucracy?" The man let out a low whistle. "Man, you really don't break character, do you?" The museum coordinator, visibly sweating now, clapped her hands together. "All right, why don't we move along to the weapons display?" Blackwood gave a slow nod. "Aye, let us journey forth." As he led the group toward the next exhibit, he caught sight of his reflection in the glass case. It was a strange thing, to be performing as a pirate when he had lived it in blood and bone. But as he strode ahead, the eager eyes of a few younger faces hanging on his every word, he realized something. Command had taken a different form, but he still held it. Garrick on set. The air crackled with the hum of production, crew members scurrying across the sand-dusted set, cameras rolling into position, and the faint murmur of last-minute script changes exchanged between assistants clutching clipboards. The Miami sun beat down overhead, but massive diffusers stretched above like great canvas sails, cutting the glare just enough to cast the perfect cinematic illusion. A storm brewing on the horizon, danger thick in the salty air. And in the middle of it all, standing atop the wooden deck of a carefully crafted replica galleon, was Garrick. Boots planted wide, he felt the deck beneath him, solid, steady, not the same as the rhythmic sway of a true vessel riding the tides, but close enough to stir something familiar in his bones. They had built it well. "All right, people." The director, a wiry man with an unruly beard and round glasses, clapped his hands together. "We're rolling right into scene 27. Captain Roderick confronts the treacherous Lord Beaumont, and I want fire, passion. You're a man betrayed, left for dead, and now you've finally got your shot at revenge. Give me something raw, something visceral. Garrick adjusted his coat, rolling his shoulders. He barely needed to slip into the role. Betrayal, vengeance, the weight of command. These were not fictions to him. The cameras snapped into place, lighting adjusted. A crew member darted forward, dabbing more sweat onto the actor opposite Garrick. An older gentleman draped in aristocratic finery, powdered wig and all, portraying the villainous Lord Beaumont. All right, folks, we're going live in 5, 4, 3... Silence fell. Then, you left me to die, Garrick's voice thundered across the set, rattling the very bones of the ship. He strode forward, each step deliberate, his coat billowing behind him. Beaumont, to his credit, held his ground. I did what I must, he replied smoothly, chin lifting. You were a rabid dog, Captain Roderick, and I simply let the sea take its course. A short, humorless chuckle escaped Garrick's throat. The sea did not take me. It forged me. He advanced another step, his presence a storm front of its own. You took my ship, my men, my life, and now you stand here, draped in silk and gold, speaking to me as if I were still the man you betrayed. Beaumont exhaled slowly, fingers twitching toward the hilt of his blade. And what would you have me say? Garrick tilted his head, considering. Then, with slow, deliberate care, he unsheathed his own cutlass. The metal glinted under the stage lights. Nothing, he murmured. Words have no place in the court of vengeance. A hushed beat. The air between them stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, cut. The director shot up from his chair, eyes alight with excitement. Holy hell, Garrick, that was electric. He spun toward the nearest assistant. Did we get that? Tell me we got that. The assistant, half dazed, gave a frantic thumbs up. Garrick, still gripping his blade, blinked. That was satisfactory? Satisfactory. The director let out a sharp laugh. That was Oscar-worthy. Hell, I'd frame that and hang it in my damn living room. He turned to the crew. Reset for another take, but honestly, I don't know how he's going to top that. The actor playing Beaumont adjusted his wig, exhaling shakily. Yes, marvelous. Very convincing. Garrick sheathed his cutlass with a flick of his wrist. He didn't fully understand half of what the director had just said, but he knew the tone. This was the voice of a man who had just witnessed something real. He glanced around at the crew, some staring in awe, others whispering amongst themselves. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Perhaps he had, in fact, been born for this. Red on patrol. The mall had become Red's new domain, a sprawling fortress of glass and tile, ruled not by kings, but by retailers, patrolled not by warships, but by teenagers wielding overpriced coffee and old women marching in synchronized formations at ungodly hours. And Red? Red was its sentinel, its watchful guardian, its iron hand of justice. Or at least that's what he told himself as he stood atop the escalator, hands on his hips, surveying the land below with the practiced eye of a seasoned commander. The food court churned with the chaos of civilization. Shoppers burdened with oversized bags, children wailing over denied pretzels, and a man in an ill-fitting bear costume whose weary eyes spoke of a soul long lost to the abyss. Aye, Red muttered to himself. A lawless land indeed. His radio crackled to life. Red, where the hell are you? Came the tired voice of Mark, a senior mall security officer, and a man who, by all appearances, had lost his will to argue weeks ago. Red pressed the button on his shoulder. Watch in the northern passage. The what? The moving stairs. A pause. Then, with the resignation of a man who had long since stopped fighting fate, Mark sighed. Just get to the food court. There's a situation. Red straightened, pulse quickening. At last, battle. He stepped onto the escalator with purpose, descending as if from the deck of a mighty warship. A rogue toddler careened past him, a mother in lukewarm pursuit. A man staggered by, juggling an absurd number of churros. But Red was undeterred. The call of duty was clear. At the frozen yogurt stand, Mark stood stiffly, pinching the bridge of his nose like a man who had seen too much. He gave Red a weary glance, then jerked his thumb toward a teenage boy slouched on a bench, glued to his phone. "There," Mark muttered. Red narrowed his eyes. "What be his crime?" Mark sighed. "Loitering." Red stroked his chin, nodding solemnly. "Aye, a classic offense." With the weight of justice on his shoulders, he strode forward, boots thudding against the tile. He loomed over the boy like a storm rolling in from the horizon. The kid barely looked up. "What?" Red crossed his arms. "You be sitting here a long while. It's a bench." "Aye," Red nodded. "A bench that demands you purchase something, or move along." The boy squinted. "That's not a thing." Red smirked. "It is now." Mark groaned. "Red, just tell him to move along." Red nodded and turned back to the kid. The teenager rolled his eyes dramatically, making a great show of exhaling before slinking off, muttering something about mall cops on a power trip. Red watched him go, satisfied. Justice prevails once more. Mark just stared at him. "You really take this job seriously, huh?" Red grinned. "A man needs purpose, lad. And in this lawless land, I be the sword and shield." Mark exhaled, rubbing his face. "All right, whatever, just maybe ease up on the pirate thing?" Red blinked. "What pirate thing?" Mark opened his mouth, then closed it, then walked away, shaking his head. Red smiled to himself, standing tall once more. The people of the mall were safe. For now. But evil never rested. And neither would he. Sullivan's unexpected encore. Sullivan stood behind the bar, rhythmically dunking a glass into the soapy water, scrubbing it with the slow, practiced ease of a man who had spent a lifetime at sea. The dim glow of the club's hanging lights cast long shadows across the counter, flickering like lanterns on the deck of a ship. As he worked, his voice rumbled low and steady, carrying across the room in a melody both haunting and rich. "Oh, the wind blows high and the waves rise tall. A sailor's fate is to hear the call. With a bottle of rum and a heart so free, I'll rest when the ocean's done with me." The few scattered patrons near the bar fell silent, their conversations trailing off as if drawn in by an unseen tide. Even Rico, the ever-jaded club manager, paused mid-count at the register, glancing up with mild surprise. By the time Sullivan let the final note fade, a smattering of applause broke the quiet. He arched a brow, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned his attention to the man at the bar who clapped the loudest. The stranger was well-dressed, salt and pepper hair combed neatly, sharp glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He had the unmistakable air of a man who had never once needed to patch a sail or haul a rope, yet spoke with the confidence of one who commanded fleets of lawyers. "You," the man said, pointing a manicured finger, "where did you learn to sing like that?" Sullivan smirked, grabbing another glass to clean. "Learn it?" he mused. "Nay, lad. You don't learn the sea's song. It learns you." The man's eyes practically gleamed. "That's exactly the kind of poetic nonsense that sells records." He leaned forward, elbows on the counter. "Ever considered recording an album?" Sullivan let out a low chuckle. "Aye, plenty of times. Usually after a full barrel of rum and a storm knocking the ship sideways." "I'm serious." The man slid a business card across the bar. "Name's Clive Henshaw. I produce records, and I'm telling you, you've got something special." Sullivan wiped his hands, picked up the card, and squinted at it like it might explode. "So, ye be saying folk would pay to hear me bellow into a tube?" Clive grinned. "Not just any folk, people who crave authenticity. Sea shanties are in right now. Nostalgia, TikTok trends, the works. You, my friend, have a voice that could bring the whole genre roaring back." Sullivan glanced over at Rico, who was watching the exchange with the same blank expression he gave customers ordering drinks with too many ingredients. "Rico, this fella be offering me a deal in the music trade." Rico shrugged. "You're wasted here." Go be a star or whatever." Sullivan frowned. "Lad, I was asking if you thought it sounded like a swindle." Clive chuckled. "It's not. I'll book you a studio session. One song, no pressure. If it works, we'll talk more." Sullivan tapped the card against the bar, rolling the idea over in his head. He'd spent years singing to the wind and the waves, his voice lost in the endless horizon. Now, someone was offering him the chance to be heard, not just by the sea, but by the world. He met Clive's gaze with a slow nod. "All right, mate, let's see if the world's ready for a proper sailor's tune." And just like that, Sullivan found himself charting a course he hadn't seen coming. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like he was sailing towards something new, something that, against all odds, actually sounded exciting.
Salty crew, a tale of change I'll share, of modern streets and office suites where pirates dare to care. Blackwood once roamed the open seas with authority in hand, but corporate courts and polished floors could not contain his band. Yo, the tide has turned, our legends never die. From stormy waves to city waves, our hearts still soar up high. We sail through change on urban seas with grit and daring flair. Modern pirates brave and free with spirit rich and rare. In boardrooms cold and neon light, our captain held his ground, with words of steel and whispered truths where modern myths are found. A learned man saw history's soul in Blackwood's steadfast might, and soon the museum's hallowed halls were graced by his true light. Then Garrick strode upon the stage, a lord of silver screen. His booming voice and fierce command revived the pirate's dream. In scenes of strife and epic duel, his legend came alive. A modern tale of valor true, where art and fate do thrive. Young Red took up the mall's patrol, where glass and tile replaced the deck. A guardian in urban realms, keeping chaos in check. With keen and scanning every move, he brought justice to the floor. A pirate's pride and city stride, commanding evermore. And Sullivan, behind the bar with rum and shanty song, sang wistful tales of salt and brine that kept the night alive. And long his voice, a beacon in the dark, called forth the ancient lore, while offers came from distant lands to sing of seas of yore. Yo-ho, raise your cups high now to those who dare to roam. From stormy seas to concrete dreams that carved a brand new home. The age may change, yet still remains the heart that beats so true. A pirate's soul forever bold in all we say and do. Oh.